It's Wednesday, May 20th, and this is news and commentary from America's Heartland. Glad you're with us. You're watching Heartlander News. Hello and welcome into this edition of Heartlander News. My name is Chris Stigall. More primary dust-ups. President Trump has weighed in and been winning the fight. I don't know if you watched it. Undoubtedly you did. Many people were wondering, and yesterday was an interesting day. President Trump did a couple of different things. He won another victory in taking out the sitting sitting congressman from Kentucky, Thomas Massie. But before he did that, he really dropped a bomb, something that many people didn't think he'd actually do. He weighed in on the Texas Senate primary. Yes, did you see it? Ken Paxton, the current Attorney General of Texas, who said, I'll get out of this race. I'll let the sitting senior senator from Texas, John Cornyn, have it. Let him walk right back into the office. All I ask is that you pass the SAVE Act. Now, Cornyn, I think, to court President Trump's endorsement, has taken a decidedly harder line than he traditionally does. He said, yes, not only does he come out for the SAVE Act, but he's even come out and supported blowing up the filibuster. But for now, Paxton seems to be leading in both the horse race in the vote tally and maybe even in money, depending on who you hear reporting. But John Thune, the leader in the United States Senate and a Cornyn ally, was asked for the first time what he makes of President Trump finally weighing in yesterday and endorsing Ken Paxton. After staying out of this, he chose the Attorney General over the sitting senior senator from Texas. Here's the leader of the Senate, a little discombobulated in reaction to the news.
Given that you've spent months trying to persuade the president to endorse John Cornyn in the Texas primary, and given that the NRSC has invested heavily to help Cornyn win that primary, how personally disappointed or frustrated are you with the president's decision to endorse Ken Paxton today?
Well, I think you all know my position on this issue. I've made it very clear for months now. And Senator Cornyn is a principled conservative. He is a very effective senator for the state of Texas. And but none of us control what the president does. He made his decision about that. That doesn't change the way I feel. And I am certainly supportive of, will continue to be supportive of Senator Cornyn and his reelection.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I don't know what Texans are ultimately going to do, but what John Thune, the senator from South Dakota, thinks of what Texans should feel. But does anybody, all due respect, what does anybody in Texas care about what Senator Thune thinks of John Cornyn or anybody else for that matter? Texans are speaking loud and clear. President Trump sees it, and it doesn't seem to be going Cornyn's way. As for Cornyn, here's his reaction to President Trump finally weighing in and endorsing Paxton. And they're all saying the same thing. They're trying to malign Paxton as someone that is dangerous and ultimately can't win because of his troubled past or some such thing. Here's Cornyn trotting it out.
Well, we've always had these family fights within the Republican Party, and then we unify in order to win the election in November. And we'll do that again. But I believe that in terms of our success in November, that Ken Paxton would be an albatross around the neck of our candidates and would likely lose to James Tallarico. I think we've come too far and worked too hard to risk that.
Okay, so just so you understand, and we've covered this here pretty extensively, but it's important that you know, this James Tallarico, the phony preacher, the Beto with a Bible in the pulpit, he's coming on and people believe that he's a real threat because a guy like Ken Paxton, I guess, has some, and I to be perfectly clear, I don't really know all that's involved in Ken Paxton's personal life or his peccadillos or his personal foibles or what have you. We're all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. I certainly do every single day. So I'm not really interested in the personal failings of Ken Paxton. But the Republican establishment is very clearly trying to convince voters that because of Ken Paxton's personal failings, he can't be a good conservative. And I think we've moved past that. I mean, yes, character counts, and we all care about that. But if a conservative agenda and saving this country from ruin, saving this country from becoming Los Angeles from coast to coast means tolerating people that are maybe lagging a little bit when it comes to their personal lives or their fallen nature, I think the Republican electorate has said, we'll choose fighters who are principled conservatives when it comes time to vote over people with blemish-free personal lives. I think no more is that's no more evident than in the president of the United States, who, in my view, has won election 3 times with the voters. President Trump, they believe in endorsing Paxton on the left. They think this helps Tallarico. Here's little Chucky Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, very, very confident now that Beto of the Bible, James Tallarico, going to win because President Trump has chosen Paxton. Take a listen.
Yes. Can I ask you, do you feel that the Democrats' chances of winning in Texas got better today with the endorsement of Ken Paxton?
Look, Texas is a huge mess for the Republicans, and I believe that we're in much better shape taking back Texas than we were a few days ago, and I think we're going to win Texas.
But you know how expensive Texas is. It could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Is the DSCC and SMP willing to spend as much as it takes to win in Texas?
Let me just say, Tallarico is talking to people about their real needs. Paxton and Cornyn, both of those people are talking about things that Texans don't care about. And so we are going to win Texas, and we are going to win Texas, whether it's Cornyn or Paxton.
And I hope, as I'm sure all of us who are conservatives hope, that the Democrats continue to blow millions upon millions upon millions of dollars chasing the great white whale that is Texas for them. They did it before with Beto. Looks like they're set to do it again, to push all their chips in on Tallarico. If, in fact, Paxton becomes the winner of that primary fight. I hope they do. I see no evidence to suggest that Texans are about to embrace a man who believes Jesus is trans or whatever crazy thing that lunatic believes. Just because he wraps himself in a preacher's robe, don't make him a Christian. Not in my view, anyway. Meanwhile, to Kentucky we go. Now, this is on the heels, by the way, all of this activity is on the heels of what we just saw happen in Louisiana with Bill Cassidy. We talked about that on Monday. Bill Cassidy, the sitting senator in Louisiana, who came in third in a primary after President Trump, and he locked horns. Cassidy's pouting now, and he's voting against President Trump on his way out the door in the Senate, but that's neither here nor there. So that's, so far, we've seen some devastating results in Indiana, where a spate of Republican sitting state senators have been kicked to the curb after they refused to redraw congressional boundary lines. Now we have seen him weigh in on Ken Paxton over John Cornyn, an establishment Republican. We've seen him take out Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, and we move on to Kentucky now, where a guy called Ed Galrine, endorsed by Donald Trump, running for the House seat currently occupied by Thomas Massie, and Galrine wins it last night over Massie. Here's some reaction in 114.
Fulgence. Coach Walt Heath from Franklin Simpson just sent me a note, and I could go on, but the kind of people that shaped me into the young man I was and never realized till so many years later, you know, what they'd done, including my FFA teacher, Mr. Hammers, World War II veteran sniper. Wonderful man, humble as the day is long. I want to thank my teammates from FFA, that's Future Farmers of America, for you out-of-towner folks. That's a big deal in Kentucky, okay? FFA. To football, to SEAL team, and the Joint Special Operations team that I've served on all over the world. Thank them, for they made me the better person that I am. And the more I was promoted, the more awards I got, the more humble I came. Now my focus is on advancing the president's and the party's agenda to put America first and Kentucky always. I'm going to keep this simple because, again, I speak fluent Kentuckian. Because for the same reasons I joined in 1983 to serve our nation. Remember, I didn't join to be a Navy SEAL. I joined to make a difference. And being a Navy SEAL was the path to do that. Weren't no books and movies, never met one. I learned to swim in the Ohio River. That's ill-advised, but that's what I did on the farm. Would have got a whooping had I found out at the house or I did that. But for the same reason I entered as a Navy SEAL officer in 1983, because I had the audacity to think I could make a difference. And I did. I will serve this district, my party, and my nation with that same audacity to make a difference for them, their families, our district, our party, and our nation. God bless America. Thank y'all.
Pretty darn wholesome. I don't know about you, but when I think about Kentucky, Granted, I don't live there, but when I think Kentucky, I think of guys like Mr. Gallrein. I think of service and selfless service to country. I think of him. Thomas Massie, on the other hand, think of him whatever you will. To take this shot in his concession speech tells us a lot about the kind of character Thomas Massie is. Last night in 115.
All right. Listen, I would have come out sooner, but I had to call my opponent and concede, and it took a while to find Ed Gallrein in Tel Aviv. I did get the call through, though. I have called and conceded the race. We've been honorable the whole time, and we're going to stay that way. You know, welcome to the most expensive congressional primary ever in the 250-year history of this country. It's not just the most expensive. This thing went on longer than Vietnam. It started 9 months ago, and they didn't even have a candidate, and they decided they want to take me out.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Massie, I don't know who they is, but the voters clearly had their say. And so if by they wanted to take you out, you mean the voters, your constituents in your district, well, that's what they did. And it's sad, really, that he doesn't have enough respect for his voters to actually just recognize that that's what his voters decided, that it wasn't about a they, that it wasn't about an other, that it wasn't about Tel Aviv or whatever underhanded, backdoor, kind of disgusting snide slap that is, and glancing flirtation with anti-Semitism that is. This is the kind of stuff that I'm thrilled to say is actually getting beaten back inside the GOP right now, because it deserves to be beaten back. And I don't know what's in the water there in Kentucky, but Rand Paul's son recently, who I guess has now apologized and said that he's going to go take time to recover and get his mind right or whatever, but he got all liquored up, as you probably heard recently, and screamed a bunch of anti-Semitic epithets at a member of the House while out at a bar in Washington, D.C. recently. You can look it up. I'm not going to get into it. But this undercurrent of anti-Semitism in the Republican Party, really unseemly, and it's led by the likes of Massie. And look, you don't have to have a fondness for the government of Israel. You don't have to even respect the government of Israel. But to take on this same biblical, historical hatred for Jews and Israel, and that's what it is. It's a hatred. It's a scapegoating. It's been historically documented, and I'm sorry to say it's rearing its head, not just on the American left, but there are some little pockets in the right. And I think for a while we were all trying to figure out, how prevalent is it? How big is it? Thankfully, with the defeat of Massie last night, we realized it is still a minority point of view inside the electorate, at least in Kentucky. And for that, I'm grateful. Also, it's worth noting that Thomas Massie, one of the first to take to the camera or to the mic or to the phone and wish him the very best and offer condolences, is a Democrat. Now, what does that tell us? Well, the Republicans in Kentucky understood what it tells us. When the Democrats seem more upset to see Massie go than the Republicans, that tells us a lot. Here's Democrat, California Democrat, no less, Ro Khanna.
My good friend Thomas Massie lost tonight. I'm angered by the smears on his character. He lost because he had the guts to take on the Epstein class. He lost because he had the guts to stand up against the war in Iran. He worked with me to pass the most consequential and popular piece of bipartisan legislation in recent history in the Epstein Transparency Act. Many young voters under 50 voted for him. He was winning them by over 30 points. And today I say, you may not have a home in the Trump coalition, but there is a new generation of populist Democrats, and we welcome you to help us change this country, change the rotten system, and have a politics that puts the working class ahead of the Epstein class.
Yeah. Look, The class of populist Democrats that Mr. Khanna is talking about, quite frankly, are the Trump coalition. I mean, President Trump was, as we all know and recognize, a classic traditional Democrat. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, he supported Democrats. He voted for Democrats. And look, even in places like Missouri, where I sit today, Democrat governors existed, Democrat senators existed. Today, Missouri is ruby red. And why? Because it's the Democrat Party that left the Democrat populists like Donald Trump. There used to be some modicum of moderation and normalcy in the Democrat Party. We used to fight about things like labor or wage hikes or certain policy, but that's not what the Democrat Party is today. Again, the Democrat Party today is Hakeem Jeffries, who we played off the top, saying that anyone that opposes them deserves to have their spirits broken. It's an odd choice of words. They're offering nothing but vitriol and hatred, not a vision for the future, just anger that you dare oppose them. And the amazing analysis on cable news continues to miss this. They think it's just because Donald Trump is that effective and we're all mind-numbed robots following our dear leader. Here is the vaudevillian Harry Enton over at CNN. Everyone very stunned and surprised at this Thomas Massie loss in Kentucky. And they continue to sell this idea that, again, everyone who votes the way Donald Trump suggests or endorses, we're all walking off a cliff with him.
Isn't surprised at all, because the bottom line is this. Donald Trump is the general of the Republican Party, and the Republican primary voters are his soldiers. And if you look at Thomas Massie, you can see it very clearly. You look in 2020, 2022, 2024, he was getting 75%, upwards of 81% of the primary vote in 2020. And today, he gets less than 50% of the vote. That's the story.
That is incredible, because you look at it so consistent time after time after time, and then, wow, look
Boom.
at tonight. Donald Trump, thank you very much.
Isn't surprised at all, because the...
Yeah, you know, Sean Davis at the Federalist actually explained why Thomas Massie lost. And it is not because Kentucky voters are mind-numbed robots following their leader, Donald Trump, and they are their loyal foot soldiers of Donald Trump's. Why did Massie enjoy such support once upon a time and last night was shellacked? Here's why, and I agree with Sean Davis at the Federalist's assessment here. Massie went from principled libertarian during COVID to GOP leadership lapdog under McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, the former speaker. And then he turned into an anti-Trump Epstein obsessive in 2025 after tweeting about the issue a whopping 3 times for the entire decade prior. The nail in the coffin for him was voting against the big, beautiful bill in 2025 because, according to Massie, it did too much to secure the border. Trump mercilessly trashed Massie in 2020, calling him a disaster for America and Kentucky, and saying he should be thrown out of the GOP entirely. But Massie easily swatted away, and he won 81-19. So you can't say he only lost because of Trump, because once upon a time, voters ignored President Trump and supported him overwhelmingly. He went toe-to-toe with Trump on COVID in 2020, and he won overwhelmingly. Massie lost last night, writes Sean Davis at the Federalist, because he went from being perceived as a quirky but lovable nerd who seemed to genuinely believe everything he said to looking like a clout-chasing influencer who cared more about getting TV time with Democrats on an issue he clearly never cared about until 5 minutes ago, and he cared more about it than he did representing his voters. Now, we'll never know, writes Davis at the Federalist, what caused the apparent personality change in Massie. Maybe it was the death of his wife. Maybe it was the Kevin McCarthy race, followed by Kevin McCarthy's ouster as House Speaker. Maybe it was a desire for notoriety or media acclaim or a lucrative podcast career outside of Congress. But the drastic change was undeniable for Massie, as was the seeming lack of interest in much of anything happening in Kentucky. You can blame Trump, you can blame Israel, you can blame Epstein, you can blame the tragic death of his spouse. I don't care, writes Sean Davis, but you can't just wave away 2020 Massie going face-to-face with Trump's machine and winning in a rout, only to then get smoked last night, 6 years later. Massie's voters didn't really change all that much. Massie changed. And Massie's voters noticed. I think that's hard to argue with Sean Davis at the Federalist and his analysis. Britt Hume over at Fox News. Take a listen.
Britt, I only have 10 seconds, but we have a long way to go to November.
We do. We got a Democratic Party, a Republican Party, which is by and large afraid to buck Trump, and a Democratic Party that's afraid not to. And that describes our politics.
There you go. I knew I can count on 10 seconds. Thank you all.
Yeah. A Republican Party that's afraid to buck Trump. I don't think that's true. I actually don't agree with Britt Hume. I don't think Republicans are in lockstep with Donald Trump at all. I think that the Republican voter sees that the Republican Party has been virtually unwilling to fight, and President Trump has been willing to quite literally be shot at, have his home raided, dragged through courts, his family name, his family fortune, all of it put at great personal risk. And he's doing it anyway because he loves the country. And I think most voters believe that. And they see him fighting. They don't see the GOP fighting. And so when they see people inside the GOP ranks fighting against a guy who's weathered more than any of their candy asses have, sorry, but that's just true. Members of Congress have not even had a modicum of opposition to the likes of Donald Trump. And the voters in this country who voted for Donald Trump know it. So if you're choosing as a voter to stand with a Republican right now, and you voted for Donald Trump, and you're looking at your current member of Congress in the House or Senate, and your current member of the House or Senate is in regular opposition of Donald Trump's agenda, the guy you deem as the greatest fighter in the party, and your House or Senate member is in opposition, how can you expect that voters are going to do anything other than punish the Republican for opposing Donald Trump? And as for Democrats, I do agree with that. Their only play is to, quote, break that spirit. That's all they've got. In fact, it's worth hearing Hakeem Jeffries say it again. Let's go back to Hakeem Jeffries. This is what Democrats are offering. Republicans voted for Donald Trump and his agenda, and they want it carried out, and they're punishing Republicans who will not help carry out a fighter's agenda. What are the Democrats offering? Britt Hume is correct about that. Not policies of their own. Not a forecast or a prescription for the future that they've authored. No, they just want to punish you, break your will, and break your spirit. How dare you try to resurrect and reclaim this government for yourself as a We the People movement? How dare you? Democrats are warning, we're going to work to break your spirit.
I guess part of how we as House Democrats view this moment, either MAGA extremists are going to break the country or we're going to break them. And our goal is to break them. We will defeat them. We have to beat them electorally, and then we have to break their spirit because of the extremism that's being unleashed on the American people. That's completely and totally unacceptable.
So there you have it. That's what the Democrats are offering. And guys like David Axelrod, the Axe over there at CNN, in clip 119 here, again, much like Hume, just totally missing it. Their obsession with Trump and their attitude that voters in this country who support Donald Trump are lemmings totally misses everything we've just talked about.
But here's the problem for Republicans. They can't live in the Republican Party without Donald Trump, and they can't live outside of the Republican Party with Donald Trump because he's an epically unpopular president who is popular among his own tribe. And his own tribe is not big enough to win elections. He's got a 23 or something % approval rating among independents. He's got virtually no support among Democrats. And it's, in some ways, it reflects the way he's governed. Donald Trump has governed to be president of the Republican Party. To be president of MAGA. This country is bigger than that. So if you're in a swing district, if you're in a swing state, you're kind of in a bind here. So here's
okay. I mean, if you're going to bet on a horse right now, do you bet on the voice of Hakeem Jeffries, who's pledging to just punish and break the spirit of anyone who opposes him? Or do you stand with a guy like Donald Trump, who actually has a vision and is taking action to achieve goals on behalf of the country? It's clear nothing has changed. In over a decade, nothing has changed. The establishment of Washington, D.C. hates this man's guts, hates the change that he's bringing, hates the real-world, aggressive, fundamental, generational shift that he's ushering in Washington, D.C., and they'll do anything to stop him. and they will tell you that he is unpopular, and they will tell you that Republicans are afraid of him and that he's just a big bully, and gosh, everything would be so much better if he'd just go away, but everybody's too afraid of him. No one's afraid of him. His voters support him. There's a big difference. And these people just don't want to believe it. They refuse to acknowledge it. And just like the January 6ers before, this idea that people that show up and convene on the National Mall to support him, they're all criminals. And that was absolutely the attempt that was made by the left and the Biden administration and Obama before. Anybody that supported this guy, anybody that dared show their support for Donald Trump, you were to be punished. January 6th and all of the political prisoners that were taken and rounded up and all the surveilling of all of us that went on social media, FBI folks coming and knocking at your door, FBI folks coming and spying on parents at school board meetings, the FBI and other law enforcement officials being ordered to raid the homes of pro-lifers like Mark Houck in suburban Philadelphia. All of that was to send a message. Raiding Donald Trump's home. I believe the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. All of it was to send a message. You're next. President Trump always said it. They're just trying to get to you. This really isn't about me. This is ultimately about trying to get to you. And his voters believe that. I believe that. Donald Trump represents a movement in this country that wants to take the country back and be governed by we, the people. A truly representative republic. And there's nothing organized crime in Washington, D.C. hates more than hearing those words. So you can continue to malign Donald Trump and his voters, but trust me, you're only stealing their resolve. And if Democrats have nothing more to offer, then we're going to break their spirit. If you haven't broken it by now with impeachments and home raids and attempted assassinations, you ain't breaking it. Sorry, Democrats. Axios talking about Trump's revenge spree, stunning Senate Democrats. Again, it's not a revenge spree, Axios. Thune called it Trump's decision, but it's Thune's problem to pass Trump's agenda with a trio of senators the president can no longer hurt. Tom Tillis has been unbowed from North Carolina since announcing his retirement after clashes with Trump. Bill Cassidy, who we mentioned earlier from Louisiana, voted with Democrats to advance an Iran war powers vote. And John Cornyn now has that runoff May 26th, but will enter it with Trump backing someone else. Adding to Thune's degree of difficulty, a president sick of the Senate and its rules and rank-and-file Republicans seething over Trump's knifing of Cornyn. So, yeah, the Senate voted yesterday, or I guess early this morning, to take up a measure to force President Trump to end the Iran war. Not going to happen. It won't ultimately end up going anywhere, but the media is very excited about it. A couple of Republicans weren't present. I think Tommy Tuberville was not present. I think Cornyn was not present, and he probably wouldn't have gone along with that, I would guess, at least for now. John Fetterman, interestingly, voted with Republicans on this in opposition to force a war powers resolution. So certainly interesting. Fetterman is on Trump's side on this situation with Iran, and we'll, of course, continue to watch that. It looks like President Trump is not getting anywhere with Iran. That is, Iran's not willing to compromise even a little bit, and so it sounds like we're starting to build up a little bit, and President Trump is going to turn the screws even tighter. Some recalcitrant Republicans who are ticked off at him now want to try to make trouble for him, but I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Also news yesterday that President Trump has reached a settlement with the government to end IRS tax audits of him and his family. Now, you're going to hear a lot about this today, and I am sure that the American left thinks they've really got him again. This is, I'll give you a little story as a backdrop. Years ago, back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was the Democrats' nominee, rigged against Bernie at the time, and Donald Trump ended up being the Republicans' nominee. Do you remember, I'm sure you do, famously when Hillary Clinton called Trump voters a basket of deplorables? You could take Trump's voters and put them in this basket of deplorables. Remember that? I happened to be a guest on Don Lemon's CNN show the night Mrs. Clinton said that. In fact, that news had just broken. I went live on CNN with Don Lemon. He begins to interview me about Donald Trump, and his jumping off question for me about Donald Trump was, don't you have a problem, Stigall, with the fact that Donald Trump has not been forthcoming with his taxes? And I remember laughing that I'm on a supposed news network. And the news, the biggest news of that evening was not the tired old story of Donald Trump's taxes. The biggest news of the political night, anyway, was Hillary Clinton calling the voters that don't agree with her deplorable. And so I brought it up. I said, Don, I know you'd like to talk about candidate Trump's taxes, but I think it's worth noting that Mrs. Clinton, the Democrat candidate for president of the United States, just called half of the country that won't support her deplorable. I think that's worth talking about, don't you? And Don Lemon summarily tossed me off the show. He didn't want to hear it, didn't want to talk about it. And that was the last time I appeared on CNN, by the way. Well, they're doing it again. The reason I tell you that story is they're back. Everything old is new again. They don't know how to take him out. They've done everything they possibly can, and it hasn't worked. And so now they figure, well, let's try the tax angle again. President Trump's extraordinary agreement with the federal government, writes the Wall Street Journal, expanded Tuesday to end all pending tax audits of him and his business. In the document signed by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, the government said it would, quote, forever bar and preclude government from pursuing certain claims against Trump, his businesses, and family matters. The agreement specifically blocks the government from taking any action regarding tax returns that have already been filed. That agreement extends the settlement amount announced on Monday, in which the government agreed to create a $1.8 billion fund to compensate people who claim to have been victims of the so-called weaponization of the government. So-called, says the Wall Street Journal. So-called weaponization of the government. So here's what this is, and the media is going to try to make hay about this. They're going to try to make it sound like President Trump will never, ever, ever be allowed to be audited again, that the federal government, Todd Blanche, has now been banned from ever looking at Donald Trump's finances again. Again, trying to build the narrative that Donald Trump has something to hide, and Todd Blanche, his henchmen in DOJ, are protecting him forever. He can enrich himself, and the IRS can never look at it. Not true. That's not what happened yesterday. Todd Blanche settled with the President of the United States, who is actively suing the United States because of the way his taxes were handled previously, in that they were leaked. It is illegal to leak tax information to the press, and someone inside the IRS did it, and President Trump sued over that and was going to win. So instead, Todd Blanche issued a settlement, a $1.8 billion fund, and that fund is going to be something from which anyone who feels they have had the government weaponized against them, particularly through the IRS, can use. Again, the settlement with Trump is only regarding the taxes that he has currently filed. It does not preclude him from being analyzed in the future, and that's a distinct difference that everyone should be aware of. We're all perfectly comfortable. If you're sane and you're fair, we all understand no one has had a rectal exam like Donald Trump, period, full stop. There can't be anyone in the country who's serious and not a lunatic partisan who actually thinks Donald Trump hasn't been analyzed inside and out, up and down. Every facet, every corner of his life, dating back for decades, has been combed over and looked through. If there was something to find from this president, including most of his private information leaked, his home raided, if they had the dirt on Donald Trump, they'd find it. And they haven't found it. Not to a court's liking, not to a jury's liking anyway. And so ultimately, what this is an attempt to try to sell the narrative that Donald Trump has something to hide, even though we've been through this over and over and over again. Of course, no, he doesn't. And now this settlement allows others who've been abused by this government to possibly cash in. I love it. And of course, the American left hates it. They're deeply concerned about it. Top Treasury lawyer resigns as the Trump settlement is announced, and that's good. The Treasury Department's chief legal officer resigned Monday following the Department of Justice's launch of a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund that could provide payouts for those connected to January 6th, and others who claim they were wrongfully targeted under the Biden administration. Now, I personally think this is a masterstroke, and do you know why? The media is going to start pushing the IRS into the media spotlight again. They're going to start making the American people stare down the barrel of the IRS and how the government has been weaponized against Donald Trump and other citizens. And whose side would you like to put money on in winning that fight? The media always, it's like Roadrunner and Coyote. The American media thinks they've got a hook. They've got a real angle here. Donald Trump is a scallywag. He's trying to get away with something. He's trying to pull one over on the IRS. And furthermore, he's going to take this pot of money and he's going to pay it off to January 6th rioters. Here's the problem with that storyline and that whole idea. People hate the IRS. Who likes the IRS? I mean, that's I don't know. That's like saying it's like cheeseburgers versus artichokes. I mean, are you kidding me? Who's a fan of the IRS? Don't you understand the American public feels taken advantage by the IRS? Don't you understand that the federal government feels like the enemy of the American public? Don't you understand that when President Trump wins a victory against the IRS and there's a fund established to pay restitution for people that have been victimized, don't you understand the voters cheer that? They're not cheering big government. They're not cheering the IRS. Voters are not excited about big government. Voters are excited that the federal workforce has shrunk to a 50-year low. Voters are excited about DOGE. Voters are excited about J.D. Vance and this fraud task force that the American president and his cabinet have established to comb through all the big, bloated, bureaucratic offices of government and find the theft in places like Medicare and Medicaid. Voters are excited about taking a hatchet to this government. And the media wants to elevate the IRS as though it's the victim. Good luck. And so you've got some Treasury lawyer who said, I'm leaving. Ooh, this is good. Oh, no. Another bureaucrat is leaving in protest. How will we ever deal with that? They always report that like that's supposed to make you sit up and take notice. Oh, a top Treasury lawyer is leaving, so that must mean there is real dissension. No, or it means there's an institutionalist who just doesn't like the direction this is going and decided he didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And that's okay. Let him walk. Let them all walk. A few more attorneys at Treasury or any other department in government are fine with me. I don't know about you. They're obsessively writing about this, too. Just so you know, Trump's $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund echoes Obama's tactics that sent billion to left-wing allies. Yeah, they're trying to liken this to Obama. The Obama Justice Department would sue large banks for discrimination and then divert settlement funds to left-wing organizations. Well, if you can prove that the federal government actually violated your civil rights, and you can prove that in a court of law and get a settlement, I'm all for it. Barack Obama held private industry hostage, just shouted the word discrimination, and shook down banks and financial institutions to just start stroking checks because they didn't want to fight it. See, this is the difference. This is not an Obama era shakedown. This is justice for the American voter and the American taxpayer. Donald Trump is taking it to the government, to the bureaucracy, to the apparatus that has been running roughshod over the voters. Barack Obama wanted to grow that apparatus and use it as a blunt force instrument against private business. There's a distinct difference here. So Barack Obama was creating a fund by attacking private industry and forcing them to settle, using the full force of the federal government to do it, and then giving the money out to left-wing groups. I see that as a huge distinction. I don't know about you. So that's just some of it to keep a sharp eye on.